The wilderness is a place of both awe and fear, particularly when confronted with its most powerful residents, bears. Encounters with grizzly and black bears can be abrupt and aggressive, challenging our views of these magnificent animals. In this video, we will share intense stories, including a family's heartbreaking experience in a secluded nature reserve and a solitary hiker's fight for survival in the Alaskan wilderness. Each narrative highlights the unpredictable behavior of these creatures and offers vital survival tips that could potentially save your life. Join us as we delve into 6 chilling accounts of bear attacks on humans, where adventure intertwines with peril. The remote wilderness of a northern peninsula, famed for its untouched beauty, was home to a sprawling nature preserve known for dense forests, rushing rivers, and an abundance of brown bears. This secluded region had long been a sanctuary for nature enthusiasts, and it was here in the heart of the wilderness that the Vorontsov family, Mikhail, Anastasia, and their children, Dmitry and Svetlana, had chosen to spend their spring vacation. Seeking refuge from city life, they hoped to find peace and rejuvenation in the serene isolation of nature, away from the stress of everyday life. The Vorontsovs were experienced in outdoor adventures. Mikhail, a 42-year-old geologist, had spent years conducting field research across the region, becoming intimately familiar with its rugged terrain. Anastasia, 39, worked as an environmental consultant, deeply invested in preserving the area's natural beauty. Their children, Dmitry, 14, and Svetlana, 11, had grown up respecting nature and had accompanied their parents on numerous backcountry trips. This trip was meant to deepen their bond with the wilderness, a place where they all found solace. They arrived at their campsite 3 days earlier, setting up along the banks of a fast-moving river. The site was idyllic, a clearing surrounded by birch and pine trees, with the river offering both a soothing backdrop and essential water. The first few days passed in quiet bliss, with hikes, photography, and stargazing under the open sky, a peaceful escape from the daily grind. Evenings were spent around the campfire, with stories and laughter that echoed in the cool night air. On the morning of May 8, 2025, the family rose before dawn. The sky was dark, and a light fog hung over the land, typical of the region's spring mornings. Their plan was simple: cross the river to explore a set of unusual rock formations Mikhail had discovered the day before and gather firewood. The weather was crisp and foggy, lending an almost otherworldly atmosphere to the early morning hours. Around 5:30 a.m., the Vorontsovs began crossing the river at a shallow point 50 meters from their camp. They didn't know that an unusually large male brown bear, weighing over 800 pounds, had been drawn to their campsite by the scent of their evening meal and food stored inside their tent. The bear, an older and hungry animal, had been roaming the area in search of food and detected the family's camp from a distance, its senses sharpened by hunger. Gavril Popov, a local fisherman, was working a half-kilometer downstream when he heard terrified screams cutting through the morning fog. Without hesitation, he abandoned his fishing gear and rushed toward the sound. Reaching a vantage point by the river, he witnessed the horrifying scene unfold before him. The bear charged into the water, first striking Mikhail and knocking him into the current. It then turned its attention to Anastasia, who was desperately trying to guide her children back toward the shore. The combined force of the river's swift current and the bear's savage attack proved too much for the family. Popov, paralyzed by fear, could only watch in helpless horror as the bear dragged each family member across the river, seemingly with methodical precision. Attempts to intervene were futile. Popov retreated to higher ground, where he managed to get cell phone reception and contacted emergency services. By the time help arrived, it was already too late. He later described the bear's behavior as disturbingly deliberate, noting that it re-entered the water multiple times to drag the family members with terrifying precision. A regional emergency response team arrived by helicopter 2 hours later. Though the campsite appeared untouched, investigators soon found a disturbance trail leading 200 meters into the woods. Tragically, all 4 members of the Vorontsov family were found dead. The cause of death was a combination of drowning and fatal injuries from the animal attack. The bear's actions caused deadly injuries, while the river's strong current contributed to the tragedy. Wildlife officials quickly mobilized a search team to locate and neutralize the bear, fearing its behavior indicated it had begun targeting humans, a rare shift in brown bear behavior. The bear was located that afternoon 3 kilometers from the campsite, hidden in dense brush. Pavel Zhukov, the lead wildlife officer, took the necessary action to end the bear's life. A necropsy revealed that the bear was an older male, around 18 years old, with multiple broken teeth and signs of prolonged nutritional stress. Experts believed its aggression could have been triggered by a particularly harsh winter that had depleted local food sources, leaving the bear desperate for food and likely drawn to the family's camp. In the wake of the incident, the nature preserve was temporarily closed to the public. Authorities implemented stricter safety measures, including mandatory bear-resistant food containers and increased ranger patrols during peak seasons. The tragedy served as a painful reminder of the unpredictable dangers of venturing into wilderness areas, especially those inhabited by large predators. To honor the Vorontsovs, several conservation organizations established the Vorontsov Wilderness Safety Initiative. This program aimed to educate hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts about respecting wildlife and following best practices for coexisting with predators in the wild, hoping to prevent future tragedies. Gavril Popov, the fisherman who witnessed the attack, never returned to fish in the area. Months later, in interviews with local media, he spoke about the haunting experience, admitting that the screams of that tragic morning continued to echo in his mind. He described the overwhelming helplessness he felt as he watched the devastating events unfold. For Popov, and for all who knew the Vorontsovs, the tragedy served as an unforgettable lesson in the fragility of life and the unpredictable forces of nature. His voice, though steady, still carried the weight of that morning's horrors, a burden that would stay with him forever. Kodiak Island, the second largest island in the United States, had long been known for its breathtaking beauty and notoriously unpredictable wilderness. Home to the largest subspecies of brown bear in the world, the island's 3,600 square miles of rugged terrain had attracted adventurers, scientists, and outdoor enthusiasts for generations, despite, or perhaps because of, the inherent risks of sharing the landscape with such formidable wildlife. Its untouched expanses offered a sense of isolation and freedom, but also carried the undeniable dangers of the wild, where every encounter with nature could turn unexpectedly dangerous. On the morning of September 12, 2022, Lieutenant Thaddeus Montgomery and his Coast Guard crew were conducting a routine training flight over the northeastern portion of the island. The helicopter crew, based at Coast Guard Air Station Kodiak, had been practicing search and rescue techniques in preparation for the approaching winter, when severe weather conditions often created dangerous situations for mariners and hikers alike. The crew was well prepared for emergencies, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would encounter on this flight. While flying over a remote valley approximately 28 miles from the nearest road, Lieutenant Montgomery spotted something unusual, a bright blue tent that appeared to be damaged, with someone waving urgently beside it. His sharp eyes immediately noted the distress signal. Without hesitation, he directed his co-pilot, Ensign Veronica Walsh, to circle back for a closer inspection. The crew confirmed that a person was indeed signaling for help, and quickly identified a small clearing about 50 yards away where they could safely land. Following standard wilderness rescue procedures, Lieutenant Montgomery and Petty Officer Zachariah Reynolds disembarked while Ensign Walsh remained at the controls. The two rescuers moved cautiously, fully aware that the situation could involve hidden dangers. The man, who now appeared visibly injured, continued waving and pointing frantically behind them. It was clear that something more than a simple injury was at play. Unbeknownst to the crew, a massive Kodiak bear had been stalking the campsite for hours. Concealed in thick brush less than 20 yards from the landing site, it had likely been drawn in by the scent of blood from the prior day's violent events. The bear had been observing the camp from afar, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. As the rescuers neared the hiker, the bear exploded from its hiding place with terrifying speed. Petty Officer Reynolds, walking slightly ahead, was the first to be struck, knocked to the ground with overwhelming force. Lieutenant Montgomery instinctively reached for his sidearm, but fearing he might accidentally hit Reynolds, instead deployed a signal flare directly at the animal. The sudden burst of light and smoke startled the bear, creating a brief window of opportunity. Montgomery seized the moment, grabbing his injured crewmate and dragging him back toward the helicopter, his eyes never leaving the bear. From the cockpit, Ensign Walsh radioed for immediate backup and medical evacuation. The hiker, later identified as Dr. Harrington Blackwood, a geology researcher from Princeton University, managed to make it to the aircraft moments later, covered in blood and visibly trembling from both injury and extreme shock. Once airborne, Dr. Blackwood revealed the grim details of what had happened. He and his research partner, Dr. Elias Thornfield, had been camping in the area for 3 days while collecting soil samples for a climate study. The morning before the incident, they had noticed bear tracks near the site, but had made the decision to continue their work, believing they had taken proper precautions with food storage and bear spray. They hadn't anticipated that a bear would be drawn to their camp with such deadly intent. That night, the bear had silently approached the tent, circling for hours before launching a sudden and violent attack. Dr. Thornfield attempted to use his bear spray but was overtaken before he could deploy it effectively. Dr. Blackwood later described how he had been forced to hide beneath their research equipment, paralyzed with fear and unable to intervene, as the bear fatally mauled his colleague and dragged the body a short distance from camp. The bear returned to the site multiple times throughout the day, seemingly guarding the area and preventing Blackwood from fleeing. Only when he heard the sound of an approaching helicopter did Blackwood risk exposing himself to signal for help. As the aircraft lifted off with both the wounded petty officer and the traumatized researcher on board, the bear was seen returning to the area near the shredded tent. Several hours later, additional Coast Guard and Alaska Wildlife Trooper teams arrived to recover Dr. Thornfield's remains and initiate a search for the bear, which had vanished into the dense wilderness, leaving nothing but fear in its wake. A subsequent investigation identified the animal as a mature male that had been tagged during a wildlife study 3 years earlier. Biologists theorized that the bear had developed an unusually aggressive pattern of behavior, possibly driven by prolonged food scarcity or past negative interactions with humans that had reduced its natural caution. This bear had become dangerous, its instincts altered by circumstances beyond the ordinary. Petty Officer Reynolds survived after undergoing multiple surgeries, though he was left with permanent nerve damage in his left arm. Lieutenant Montgomery was awarded a Coast Guard Commendation Medal for his quick thinking and bravery under extreme pressure. Dr. Blackwood eventually recovered physically, but continued to experience lasting trauma from the event. He chose not to return to field research, instead focusing on laboratory work and advocating for improved safety protocols for wilderness scientists. He hoped that his experience would spur changes that could prevent others from suffering as he had. The tragedy prompted a thorough review of safety guidelines for those working in remote areas of Kodiak Island. Recommendations were updated to emphasize the importance of traveling in pairs or groups, carrying multiple types of deterrents, and utilizing more reliable communication equipment. For the close-knit community of researchers operating in Alaska's backcountry, the incident served as a grim reminder of how quickly the awe-inspiring wilderness could turn perilous. Despite an extensive effort, the bear that had stalked Dr. Blackwood and taken Dr. Thornfield's life was never found, leaving an unresolved shadow over the land and the researchers who dared to explore it. Lake McDonald, the largest and deepest lake within a major national park in the northwestern United States, had long attracted visitors seeking the untamed beauty of alpine wilderness. Surrounded by snow-draped peaks and thick forests, the lake's icy winter surface held a quiet grandeur that appealed to a different kind of explorer, those drawn to solitude and raw nature. In March of 2019, 5 college students, Thornton Thor Westervelt, Maximilian Prentice, Augustus Blackwood, Wellington Zhao, and Bartholomew Jenkins, ventured into this frozen landscape during their final spring break before graduation. Close friends, since their first year at a regional university, the group had been planning the trip for months as part of a senior multimedia project. Their goal was to document the stark beauty of the wilderness with drone footage and still photography. Arriving at their cabin on March 21st, they spent the first day setting up and scouting locations along the lake. All 5 were seasoned outdoorsmen, raised in the rugged terrain of the Northwest, and familiar with the risks that came with venturing into remote areas. They understood the threat posed by wildlife, but they underestimated the dangers of the unseasonably warm weather that had affected the region for the past week. Park officials had posted warnings about unstable ice conditions, and the group had agreed to remain close to shore. According to survivor accounts, the first 2 days were calm and productive. They captured stunning visuals during daylight hours and reviewed their footage each night, gathered around the fireplace. Before sunrise on March 23rd, Thor Westervelt rose early, eager to capture the golden glow of dawn reflecting across the ice. He left a handwritten note for the others, gathered his drone gear, and walked to a location roughly half a mile from their cabin. Unbeknownst to him, a female grizzly and her cub had emerged prematurely from hibernation. The unusually warm temperatures had disrupted their natural cycles, leaving the bears confused, hungry, and agitated. Their den lay hidden less than 200 yards from where Thor set up for his morning shoot. Investigators later concluded that the bear likely saw Thor as a threat to her cub. Around 7:15 a.m., the rest of the group, having read Thor's note, set out to join him. As they approached, they heard distant shouts echoing across the lake. Maximilian Prentice, who led the way, reported seeing Thor sprinting across the ice, followed closely by a charging grizzly. In his terror, Thor headed toward the center of the lake rather than back to shore. The ice, already weakened by several days of above-freezing temperatures, couldn't support the combined weight and impact. Approximately 300 yards from shore, both Thor and the bear crashed through the surface into the frigid water below. The four friends watched in horror from the shoreline as Thor struggled to pull himself back onto the ice, which continued to break away under his hands. The bear, equally panicked, thrashed in the water nearby before managing to claw its way onto more solid ice and disappearing back into the forest, leaving a trail of water behind. Augustus Blackwood attempted to reach Thor, crawling cautiously over the ice, but was forced to retreat when the surface began to crack beneath him. Wellington Zhao used a drone to try to get a better view of the situation, while Bartholomew Jenkins called emergency services on their satellite phone. By the time park rangers and emergency personnel arrived 20 minutes later, Thor had disappeared beneath the surface. The water temperature was just above freezing, giving him only minutes of functional mobility before hypothermia set in. Despite the rangers' immediate response with ice rescue equipment, they were unable to locate him in the murky depths. Thor's body was recovered the following day by search and rescue divers. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was drowning exacerbated by hypothermia, with no evidence of direct injuries from the bear itself. The bear and her cub were located later that week by wildlife officials, who decided not to euthanize the animal after determining she had not displayed predatory behavior, but had acted defensively to protect her young. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Park Service and the wildlife management community. It represented a perfect storm of circumstances: climate change affecting hibernation patterns, human presence in sensitive wildlife areas, and the unpredictable nature of wild animal behavior. The four surviving friends established the Wilderness Safety Foundation in memory of their fallen companion. The foundation focused on educating visitors about the impacts of climate change on wildlife behavior and the importance of maintaining safe distances from all wild animals, particularly during seasonal transitions when animal behavior might be less predictable. Park officials implemented additional warnings and restrictions regarding ice safety and wildlife awareness, particularly during early spring when bears were emerging from hibernation and potentially more aggressive due to hunger and the protection of young cubs. For Maximilian, Augustus, Wellington, and Bartholomew, the events of that March morning forever changed their relationship with the wilderness they had once loved unreservedly. While they continued to advocate for conservation and responsible outdoor recreation, their perspective was now tempered by first-hand knowledge of nature's power and unpredictability. The drone footage Thor had captured that morning, which they later recovered from his equipment, became part of their multimedia project, transformed from a celebration of natural beauty into a sobering memorial to their friend and a warning to others about respecting the wild. Kenai Peninsula, Alaska, June 15, 2017. The emerald waters of the Kenai River had long been revered by anglers and outdoor enthusiasts as one of Alaska's most pristine waterways. Slicing through the Kenai Peninsula, the glacier-fed river was renowned for its salmon runs and breathtaking scenery. Dense forests of spruce and hemlock crowded the banks, concealing an abundance of wildlife, including one of North America's densest populations of brown bears, drawn to the river's bounty each summer. Fitzwilliam Fitz Montgomery and Percival Percy Rutherford had been kayaking partners for over 20 years. The two men, both 48, first met during their college days at a prestigious university and had maintained their friendship through annual wilderness adventures. While both had successful careers, Fitz as a corporate attorney in a major West Coast city and Percy as a neurosurgeon in the Pacific Northwest, they consistently set aside 2 weeks each summer to disconnect from their demanding lives and reconnect with nature and each other. Their journey down the Kenai had begun 3 days earlier at a popular launch site upriver. Their plan was to kayak the full length of the river, camping along the way and fishing for the legendary local king salmon. The first 2 days had been idyllic, with perfect weather, minimal mosquitoes, and several impressive catches they photographed and released. On the third day, around noon, they pulled their kayaks onto a small gravel bar for lunch. The spot was a picturesque clearing surrounded by thick willows and alders. According to Percy's later account, they had carefully followed recommended bear safety protocols throughout their trip, cooking away from their sleeping area, hanging food in bear-resistant containers, and carrying bear spray attached to their life vests. As they unpacked their sandwiches on the gravel bar, neither man noticed the subtle signs of bear activity. Fresh tracks partially washed away by the morning tide, broken branches on several nearby willows, and the remains of a partially eaten salmon hidden among the rocks. Unknown to them, a female brown bear with 2 cubs had claimed the area as a temporary resting place between fishing excursions. Percy later recalled hearing a low woofing sound moments before chaos erupted. The female brown bear burst from the willows less than 20 feet away, likely startled by their presence and immediately protective of her cubs. Her charge was lightning fast and ferocious. Fitz, who was closest to the bear's emergence point, was knocked violently into the rushing current before he could react. Percy fumbled for his bear spray, which was clipped to his life vest. In his panic, the canister slipped from his grasp and landed in the shallow water at the edge of the gravel bar. With the bear's focus momentarily diverted toward Fitz, Percy scrambled up a nearby cottonwood tree, climbing as high as the branches could support his weight. From a perch roughly 15 feet above the ground, Percy watched in horror as the scene unfolded below. Fitz had pulled himself back onto the gravel bar about 30 yards downstream, but he was disoriented and struggling to stay upright. The bear, fully committed to protecting her cubs from any perceived threat, charged again. Percy tried to shout a warning, but the roar of the river drowned out his voice. What followed, according to Percy's later report to authorities, was 3 minutes of pure terror that felt like 3 hours. The bear knocked Fitz down repeatedly as he attempted to get up, tearing his clothing and inflicting deep lacerations on his back and arms. He curled into a protective ball, shielding his head and neck as he had been taught in wilderness safety courses. The bear continued the attack, at one point dragging him several feet by his leg, breaking ribs and puncturing a lung. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The bear, perhaps convinced the threat had passed or drawn away by the sounds of her cubs nearby, retreated into the dense vegetation. Percy remained in the tree for nearly 20 minutes, watching for any sign of her return, before descending to help his critically injured friend. Using supplies from their first aid kit and strips of torn clothing, Percy managed to bandage Fitz's most serious wounds and fashioned a crude splint for his leg. With great effort, he dragged the semi-conscious Fitz into their larger 2-person kayak. Believing that continuing downstream might lead them back into danger, Percy made the difficult decision to paddle upstream against the current toward the nearest ranger outpost they had passed earlier in the trip. After nearly 4 hours of exhausting effort, fighting both the current and the challenge of keeping Fitz stable, Percy spotted a small float plane skimming low over the river. The pilot, Wade Mackenzie, an experienced bush pilot, had been transporting supplies to a remote fishing lodge. He noticed the unusual sight of a backward-traveling kayak and the frantic waving of Percy's life vest. Mackenzie managed to land his plane on a straight stretch of the river and taxi toward the kayak. With his assistance, they transferred the now severely hypothermic and shock-stricken Fitz into the aircraft. The small plane, designed to carry only a few passengers with minimal gear, was just able to take off again with the extra weight thanks to Mackenzie's skill. Fitz underwent emergency surgery at a regional hospital, where doctors worked to repair his punctured lung and multiple deep wounds. After 6 hours of surgery and several blood transfusions, he was stabilized. His recovery would span several months and include multiple follow-up procedures, but against the odds, he survived. Wildlife authorities investigated the site the following day and confirmed Percy's account based on clear physical evidence. They concluded that the bear involved had been a female with cubs using the gravel bar as a temporary resting area between fishing attempts. No action was taken against the bear, as her behavior was deemed consistent with natural maternal instincts. Against all expectations, both men returned to the river exactly 1 year later. This time they traveled by guided jet boat rather than kayak, and visited the exact spot where the attack had occurred. There they placed a small, simple plaque among the rocks, not to commemorate their ordeal, but as a tribute to the wild power of the river and its inhabitants. The plaque read, "The river gives, the river takes. Respect both." The vast expanse of sea ice stretching across Baffin Bay had been photographer Huxley Thornton Whitehall's obsession for nearly a decade. A veteran wildlife photographer with work featured in leading global publications and conservation journals, Thornton Whitehall had built his reputation on capturing intimate moments of Arctic wildlife, particularly the increasingly threatened polar bear. His efforts documenting the impacts of climate change on the Arctic ecosystem had earned multiple awards and helped bring international attention to the plight of these iconic predators. April in Nunavut typically offered ideal conditions for polar bear photography. The returning daylight allowed up to 14 hours of shooting time, while the sea ice remained solid enough to support both wildlife and human movement. The region was home to approximately 2,500 polar bears, roughly 15% of the global population, making it a premier destination for those seeking to document these apex predators in their natural habitat. On the morning of April 8th, Thornton Whitehall set out from the small Inuit community of Pond Inlet, where he had been based for the past 3 weeks. Accompanying him was local guide Aklak Kutuk, whose family had navigated and hunted across these frozen waters for generations. The two had developed a strong working relationship over several previous expeditions, with Kutuk providing transportation via snowmobile and offering critical insight into bear behavior and ice safety. According to Kutuk's later report to local authorities, they had traveled approximately 17 kilometers from the settlement when they spotted a large male polar bear hunting along the edge of an ice ledge, a crack in the sea ice where seals often surface to breathe. Following standard safety protocols, they maintained what they believed was a safe distance of about 400 meters and set up Thornton Whitehall's camera equipment on a stable ice ridge. The photographer, known for his preference to work solo at times, insisted on continuing alone from that point. Kutuk agreed but remained nearby at the snowmobiles, keeping watch through binoculars. For nearly an hour, Thornton Whitehall photographed the bear as it paced along the ice edge without success. Then, seemingly uninterested in the lead, the bear began to move off in another direction. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. The bear, which had appeared focused on hunting, suddenly shifted course and began walking directly toward Thornton Whitehall's position. At first, the photographer did not appear concerned, continuing to take photos while gradually backing away. According to Kutuk, the bear's behavior changed markedly when it reached the area where Thornton Whitehall had been kneeling earlier, suggesting it had picked up his scent. The bear's walk turned into a trot and then, without warning, a full charge. Now clearly alarmed, Thornton Whitehall turned and began running toward the snowmobiles. Burdened by heavy Arctic clothing and his equipment, he struggled through the knee-deep snow that had drifted along the ridge. Kutuk immediately started the snowmobiles and raced toward him, but the difficult terrain and remaining distance made a rapid rescue impossible. Roughly halfway between his original position and the snowmobiles, Thornton Whitehall deployed a handheld marine flare, standard safety gear for Arctic fieldwork. The sudden burst of red light momentarily disoriented the bear, causing it to flinch and pause its advance. Seizing the opportunity, Thornton Whitehall attempted to reach a nearby pressure ridge in the ice that might offer partial cover. He didn't make it to the ridge. The bear, now within 20 feet, resumed its charge and overtook him with a powerful swipe that tore through his insulated outerwear and knocked him flat onto the ice. According to Thornton Whitehall's later account from his hospital bed, he remembered the immense weight of the animal standing over him, its breath steaming in the Arctic air, and the overpowering scent of seal fat clinging to its fur. Then, in a moment that later puzzled both the men and wildlife specialists, the bear simply stopped. It stood over the motionless photographer for several long seconds, appearing to study him with quiet curiosity. Then, without warning or aggression, it turned and walked away at a calm pace, occasionally glancing back but never returning. By the time Kutuk reached Thornton Whitehall's side, the animal was already several hundred meters away, moving toward another distant ice lead. Thornton Whitehall was conscious but seriously injured, bleeding from deep lacerations to his shoulder and back where the bear's claws had pierced through his clothing. Demonstrating remarkable composure, Kutuk administered emergency aid using supplies from their expedition kit and secured his injured companion to the snowmobile. The return journey to Pond Inlet was grueling, with every jolt on the rough ice causing Thornton Whitehall visible pain. From Pond Inlet, an emergency medical evacuation flight transported him to a regional medical facility where surgeons worked for hours to repair damaged muscles and tendons. After stabilization, he was transferred to a specialized trauma center in southern Canada for additional treatment and rehabilitation. Wildlife analysts reviewing the incident proposed that the bear had likely been exhibiting investigatory behavior rather than predatory intent. This theory was supported by evidence that the animal had access to natural prey, as suggested by the scent Thornton Whitehall recalled. The disorienting effect of the flare, combined with the photographer's instinctive stillness after the attack, closely resembling standard bear encounter protocol, may have led the bear to lose interest and withdraw. After 6 months of intensive rehabilitation, Thornton Whitehall regained about 80% function in his injured arm. The psychological recovery took longer, with recurring nightmares and a new sober respect for the strength and unpredictability of the wildlife he had spent his life documenting. In later interviews, he stressed that he did not blame the bear, acknowledging that he had willingly entered its territory and accepted the inherent risks. Most notably, 18 months after the attack, Thornton Whitehall returned to the Arctic with a renewed mission to document traditional knowledge about polar bear behavior and produce educational resources aimed at reducing human-wildlife conflicts in remote environments. His guide on that journey was once again Aklak Kutuk, the man whose swift actions had saved his life on the ice. A popular mountain reserve located on the border between two southeastern states had long held the title of the most visited protected wilderness area in the United States. Its ancient mist-veiled ridges housed an incredible range of plant and animal species, including one of the highest concentrations of black bears in North America. Millions of visitors traveled each year to explore its 800 square miles of forested landscape, seeking tranquility and adventure. While most encounters with the park's estimated 1,900 black bears concluded peacefully, not all did. The Harrington Fitzwilliams family, Montgomery, Eleanor, their children Reginald and Penelope, and their German shepherd, Archibald, had been preparing for their RV vacation to the area for months. Montgomery, a 42-year-old pharmaceutical executive from Chicago, had arranged for a 32-foot luxury motorhome, promoting it as an ideal way to enjoy the wilderness without abandoning comfort. Eleanor, a pediatric nurse, had initially suggested a more traditional camping experience but ultimately agreed to the compromise of an RV-based trip. According to the incident report later filed with local rangers, the family arrived at a campground along a river on August 15th. Nestled at a moderate elevation and known for its accessibility and scenic charm, the site was among the area's most frequented. Their first 2 days were uneventful, filled with drives through winding mountain roads, short hikes to nearby waterfalls, and evenings spent around their campfire roasting marshmallows. Upon check-in, they had received a standard safety briefing, including a pamphlet outlining how to manage food and waste to reduce the risk of attracting bears. That summer had seen an unusually dry season, resulting in sparse berry growth at higher elevations. As a result, bears were increasingly drawn to lower elevations and human-occupied zones in search of alternate food sources. On the evening of August 17th, the family prepared a hearty outdoor meal, grilling steaks and corn over the site's fire ring. According to Eleanor's later statement, they were diligent about cleanup, wiping down surfaces and storing leftover food in the RV's refrigerator. However, in their post-dinner relaxation, they overlooked two key items: a portable grill with a grease trap left outside, and a small cooler with drinks and condiments pushed partway under the RV's awning. By 9:30 p.m., the family had settled inside their motorhome. The children were watching a movie on a tablet while Montgomery and Eleanor played cards at the dinette. Archibald, the family's German shepherd, was the first to sense that something was wrong. His sudden, insistent barking startled the group. Montgomery rose and looked out into the darkness. What he saw froze him. A large black bear, later estimated to weigh around 350 pounds, was exploring their campsite, its bulk visible in the RV's exterior lights. The bear had already discovered the grease trap and was in the process of tearing it apart when Montgomery's face appeared at the window. The animal paused and locked eyes with him. In most situations, black bears retreat when they become aware of humans. This one did not. Instead, it advanced deliberately toward the motorhome. The bear began pawing at the RV's door, leaving deep scratches in the metal. The family retreated toward the rear of the vehicle, while Archibald barked furiously. Montgomery later recounted seeing the bear's breath fogging the glass as it rose on its hind legs and peered inside. Attempting to deter the bear, Montgomery cracked the door open to shout and wave his arms, a tactic he'd seen in a documentary. It was a mistake. The bear immediately lunged, nearly forcing its way inside before he managed to slam the door shut again. Its claws raked the doorframe, tearing off weather stripping and gouging the fiberglass exterior. Just as the bear resumed its assault, an unexpected distraction occurred. Archibald, who had been held back by Penelope, broke free and rushed the door, barking wildly. Though still inside, his display of aggression seemed to startle the bear, buying the family a few critical seconds. Coinciding with this pause, a parked vehicle on a routine patrol pulled into the campground. The flashing lights and engine noise finally drove the bear away. It vanished into the trees, leaving behind a damaged vehicle and a deeply shaken family. The responding officer, Ranger Juliana Martinez, documented the incident and initiated the setup of a bear trap in the area. In her report, she expressed concern about the animal's bold behavior, citing habituation and food conditioning, developments that, under park policy, could lead to relocation or euthanasia. Harrington Fitzwilliams declined relocation to another site and left the park early the next morning. During a follow-up conversation, Montgomery acknowledged that while they had received instructions on food storage, they had underestimated the risks of even minor oversights. 2 days later, the bear was captured at a nearby campsite after a similar incident. Wildlife biologists identified it as a mature male previously tagged for population research. Since the bear had not actually accessed human food and no injuries had occurred, officials opted to relocate it to a remote area within a nearby national forest, instead of euthanizing it. For the Harrington Fitzwilliams family, the encounter became a catalyst for change. Back in Chicago, Montgomery began donating annually to conservation efforts and developed an educational presentation on bear safety, which he regularly shared with local schools. Eleanor, reaffirming her original instincts, later persuaded the family to try camping again, this time in a tent but with a newfound respect for the rules of the wilderness and a commitment to doing things right.